Hey CDA and welcome back to Satisfactory. This is my bite-sized run, which is aimed at those of you who want to progress through this game without every build taking weeks to complete, but still have an awesome looking factory. And last time around we set up all the steel and concrete we are going to need for computers and heavy modular frames. However, I don't necessarily think this qualifies as a nice looking factory. Well, no. It looks very organized and very straight, so I really like that. But I think we can make it a little bit better. But we are going to do that in this episode, combined with another thing we have to get fixed, and that is the actual copper production that we also need for those modular frames and computers. And that is of course the production we need on top of the production we already have. Luckily we have this entire nice open area over there to get that going. So let's just get some buildings in place and see if that all fits. So you might remember from last time that I tried to use a couple of blueprints like this to actually speed up the building process by a lot, and proceeded to horribly fail at that because I simply couldn't get the blueprints to connect in the way that I want to. Well, I'm not one to give up very quickly, so I went back to the drawing board to see if I could fix that problem, and I think I did, sort of, because I actually found what the problem was with these blueprints. Now, if you're anything like me, your first instinct will probably be to try to kind of snap these blueprints to the buildings that you already have. You can actually get that to work with some luck, but as you can see, I'm right now trying to fit this right over here in the corner, and it keeps being one tile off, which is infuriating and also takes up a lot of time that you could spend towards building. And to be honest, I've been trying this for a few minutes now and haven't actually managed to line it up completely. The second, so the problem with that is, the reason that is actually a problem is that for some reason the blueprint designer always seems to consider the middle of the blueprint designer the place that it's attaches the blueprint to your cursor. So this is a rather large blueprint, at least compared to the size we can make it, and it means that my cursor is fit to the middle of the blueprint. But if I wanted to snap to anything, normally what you would do is you would kind of touch the side of whatever you wanted to snap to, and then it would snap. But it doesn't seem to really work that way. I'm not entirely sure how the developers will fix that, but that is, I think, the main reason that this annoyance is caused. Now, you can solve this partially by making an under layer where you kind of place it on top of, which makes it a little bit more easy to move around. But I've tried that, and honestly it's kind of a hit and miss thing as well. So first of all, you spend the time making the layer under where you actually want to place this, and then it might or might not work. On top of that, last time around, we've seen that you typically want to be a little bit more creative with how you actually lay these buildings out, so making a larger blueprint like that is probably not the most efficient way to progress, or at least not the way you can make your blueprints in such a way that they are the most flexible. So how do we solve that? Well, you make a very simple blueprint like this. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. First of all, we have the machine, we have two floor holes perfectly aligned with the in and output, we have a power pole and a power pole connected to the machine. So that by itself will already save us a huge chunk of time. It's also in the middle of the blueprint designer, and that means that it will nicely align with our cursor and not be over in a corner somehow when we're trying to place it. Now, you will also notice that it's actually on the ground level. And the reason for that is that any verticality you put in your blueprint design will actually be remembered by the blueprint. So if you build up, your blueprints will basically start floating in the air. So it's a little bit hard to place it. For the same reason, I couldn't make this without a foundation. you can remove the foundation after making this, but then your floor holes will actually float in the air because you can't place it into an existing foundation. Maybe that will change in the future, but that is for now how that works. Now, using this like it is, because it's only a single machine, actually makes it more flexible in a larger version and not necessarily any slower, because it's very easy to just align the machines like you want them to, get the number of machines that you want to. If you want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter, it's very easy to place them, but it does require one additional step. Now, before I get into that, you might be wondering why there's no lift attached. For some reason, I'm not entirely sure why that is, if you try to place a lift on a ground floor floor hole like this, it will actually say that it's colliding with the blueprint designer itself, and it doesn't allow that in order to make a blueprint. I'm not entirely sure why that is, because you will notice that the lift isn't actually coming out on the bottom side of the floor hole. You have to manually put that in yourself as well. But for some reason it still counts as colliding, so you can't place the lifts in there. To be honest, I'm not too worried about it just yet, because in most of the designs I made with lifts in floor holes, it actually turned out that when I placed those blueprints later on, outside of the blueprint designer, the lifts were very often messed up, so there seems to be some bug involved with the actual placement of lifts in floor holes in a blueprint. So if that's going to be an issue anyway, you might as well just add them in manually later on and just save yourself quite a bit of time already with this very simple setup. Which brings me to the one additional step that you do need to take, and that is make a secondary floor to actually place the blueprints on. So like you can see, I went down just one little meter and built an entire secondary floor, so we have some room to play around with to actually place our blueprints on. But placing the blueprints is now really easy because it's so small. It is nicely aligned with your cursor, and because it's in the middle, and that just makes it very easy to place this. Now if we go to the blueprint mode, it actually becomes extremely easy to place more than these. So if you aim sort of for the middle of the other blueprints, it will automatically snap to already existing blueprints. As you can see, now it is really fast to just build a huge row of these facilities. We can flip them around if that's what we want to do, and build another row in this direction. I'm now out of materials, but I guess you get the point. Now this makes sure we have a nice little line of constructors with floor holes and power poles already attached, and that would have saved me about 1 hour, I think, of building in the previous episode. Now of course you do need to go in and then remove this flooring and then remove the flooring below, but as soon as you do that, you can immediately see the floor holes popping out and you're good to go to connect everything up with belts. And there we go, our entire facility is set up with everything we need for copper. It's not the most interesting facility because it is basically 8 constructors making copper sheets, it's 5 of them making copper wire, and then 2 of them making cables. But other than that, it's a very good use case of the actual blueprints in action. It is also a very good use case of the experimental build in action, because as I was recording this, we got an update, and you might notice that there's something missing. There is no lift in my build. Well, there's a few lifts. I have this line coming in over here with the coal, sorry, not the coal, the copper, which I'll get to in a moment. But you might be noticing all these lifts missing over here, and the reason that they're missing is, for some reason, we now have this nice little feature in the current build, where if we place down a conveyor lift, let's say like this, let's make sure we angle it correctly, that works just fine. But then when you try to connect it on the other side, it says an identical buildable is already built there. And no, it has nothing to do with the direction, it has nothing to do with being Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, it simply doesn't work. So that means we cannot actually build any lifts in the floor holes at the moment, and I'm hoping that this is going to be fixed very soon. I noticed that when I went to the support page to report this, there were already, I think, a few hundred people reporting this, to the point where the developers actually locked the thread on that. And considering I pre-record these a couple of days in advance usually, probably by the time you see this, it will already be fixed, but it does mean I can't actually show you the complete build right now. I did set everything up, so all the mergers and splitters are there. There's a belt are all around here with the copper sheets. Then the outgoing belt for the wires is actually going into the incoming belt for the cable, of course, and then we have another outgoing belt over here. Then I'm actually combining all those 3 outgoing belts into one single belt, and similarly to what we did last time around, I have a smart splitter over here that is spreading these 3 items across these 3 storage units. And then of course we can use those storage units to actually make some truck stations, stuff like that, as soon as we have anywhere for those trucks to go. But for now, I think I'll just leave it at that. Now, like I said, I think in the start of this episode, as well as the previous episode, I do want to make sure we make this build a little bit prettier. Because even though this looks very organized, and I do like the fact that with these blueprints we can make sure that all these power poles are exactly in the same position, all the floor holes are already in a good position. It would be even better if we could also attach the actual lifts, not just like afterwards, but maybe in the blueprint already. The lifts themselves, if you include them in the blueprint, are very, very buggy. So I'm actually assuming that the current bug in this new build on the experimental ranch has something to do with them trying to fix the floor holes in the blueprints. At least that's what I'm hoping. But at least for now, you definitely do not want to combine both lifts as well as floor holes in your blueprint. So, but still, it's actually saving me a lot of time. Now, given that we have this built over here, and that we now have a full facility set up where we have a lot of smelters, we have all these constructors over here, and we have this entire facility with steel production over here, as well as some limestone production, concrete production. I'm thinking that we should probably see if we can make this look a little bit better. Now, before we do that, I just want to make sure I mention this explicitly. If you're using this copper node like I am, you need to overclock it to 200% to make sure you actually have enough ore to feed all those facilities. Otherwise, you will not get the production you're going to need later on. But anyway, this is very short and sweet. Let's get to the making things pretty. Okay, so let's start with some of the basics, the sides of the facility. I actually don't necessarily mind this concrete look. Especially with this kind of layer in here and the way the water flows around on this side. And on the other side, we actually have some height differences, which looks kind of interesting. But still, if you want to dress it up a little bit, you could do very easily something like this. Ta-da! This is very simple. It doesn't take any time at all to do this. Well, it does take some time, but not much time. And I do think it really adds some vibrancy to your build. So basically what I've done is, you've seen me do it in my previous playthrough actually before as well, is just adding some details to the actual foundation. Just a small little wall, like a 1 meter high wall around where you're building. Just makes it look a little bit more intentional. Be warned though, it does make it a little bit more annoying to actually get on and off your platforms. So do it after you're actually done. And what you can also do is add in some of these lines that just make your buildings look visually more interesting without really being any complicated to build. This is just a single height wall as well on the top level of this lower end of the foundation. And then on the top we have that double row that that larger row that we also had on our power facility. Makes it a little bit more consistent. It's the same build style in the same area. That's something I personally really like. And like I said, it doesn't take any time at all. This balcony over here is just practical. Makes it easier to get around your building in case you need to go up here or build anything. And I really like these pillars, which are basically halfway into the foundation. It's really easy to place them. They're at the exact same height as the building itself. And that's really what makes this work, I think. Makes it look more like a real building. And again, it doesn't take much time. You could actually set something like this up in a blueprint as well. Although it would probably not save you all that much time, for the simple reason that usually when you're actually building it, you don't necessarily already know exactly how your layout is going to work. So I don't think it's going to save you that much time in the long run if you set this up in the blueprint, but you could definitely do that. Speaking of which, let's apply this to the other sides as well. Having done the sides, this is what I came up with, and I know that preferences will definitely vary on this, because I can imagine that a lot of people won't like the fact that there's these empty spaces over here. But actually, the reason I took this approach is that I do like the way all these little trees and flowers come out. We actually have a small island, or how do you call it, like almost a green balcony on the side of the facility over here. And I kind of like the open space around it. You also see sometimes the creatures wandering under there. It really gives a feel of this facility being built in a world that was alive before we got here, which it was. Yeah, it's just a general preference. Of course, you can fill this up with concrete. It actually doesn't look bad if you do. I actually also kind of like that build. I just think it looks a little bit more interesting and dynamic like this. At the same time, if you overdo this, and this is definitely getting to the edge of that, it's very easy to make it feel a little bit cluttered. So if you fill up these areas, make sure that you don't have too much of the rocks actually sticking through your foundations. So for example, I think if I do it over here, just as an example, you will see actual like the thing sticking through. That actually looks really messy. So in that case, I would opt to build it out a little further, just so you don't have the hill sticking through. But if you do that, just make sure you don't have too many angles and too many corners in there, because then that is actually distracting a little bit. Now we will actually need to work on this a little bit further in the future when we put in the truck stations. But there's one more thing I want to add, because right now the boring part of this is definitely the actual factory part. We have all these facilities, they're laid out very orderly, and when you're actually on top of there, it looks kind of interesting because of the way we laid it out. But if you're walking around your world and you're looking at this factory, it doesn't all look all that interesting, so I think we can fix that. And there we go. I think just adding a little roof type of structure in here makes it look a lot more interesting. Zooming in a little bit, you can actually see this is very straightforward to build, and then once again I want to keep this bite-sized, so we need to be very to the point and not spend hours on improving the looks of our facility just because. There's definitely a very good argument to do exactly that if you want to. I mean, it's called fun, so if you want to have that fun, by all means go and get it. But if you want to stay kind of efficient and make sure you make some progress, making sure you make it look good but still have it be done in about 10 or 15 minutes of building, then this is definitely a way to go. So these are just metal pillars up here, stacked up to a height that is definitely just above the facilities. You can even go up a little higher than this maybe, but actually I don't think this is a particularly bad height. The pillars actually, you can do them in a horizontal manner as well. And these metal pillars actually collide pretty well without looking ugly. Let me see if we can show it over here. Whoops. No, I didn't want to drop down there. You can see it over here. The connection actually looks very natural, so I really like using the pillars for that reason. There's none of that flickering that sometimes happens when you clip some of these items in each other. And the roofs, if you build the roofs on top of here, they actually stick out a little bit, and that actually looks a lot better than when they would be perfectly aligned. So what you need to do if you build something like this, make sure you start building the roof in the corner, and then just drag it out. And if you've been aligning your facilities in such a way that you either use half or entire foundations to spread them out, you can easily work with that and kind of make sure everything else is aligned. Sometimes the roofs will not be sticking out exactly with the same distance on every side, but you definitely won't notice that as long as you don't overdo it. I mean, this is sticking out maximum size, I think, and if you have somewhere else sticking out the minimum size, that might look a little bit weird, but if you're a little bit careful about that, that shouldn't happen. And speaking of the roof itself is not just a flat roof. That would be really boring, and we don't want boring. So in this area where we have the foundries with all this smoke coming out, I think it would make sense to make sure there's an open space. So I have a pretty large open space over here. But then on the rest of the facility, I actually went with alternating gaps. So we have a row of a foundation, and then we have an open gap. And in that gap is one of those frame floors. And they just actually make it look very interesting. They make sure your facility doesn't need artificial lighting. which is a thing that can easily happen if you're not careful, that your entire facility becomes extremely dark when you're moving around. If you're wondering why there's a hole in the floor, that's because we still need to fix these lifts. So don't forget that we still need to do that. But yeah, I think this looks very nice, and like I said, it's really easy to set up. And when you look at your facility from a distance now, it is definitely looking more interesting than it would without these structures on the top. So, once again, building with the environment, hoping that you're enjoying this just as much as I am. And next time around, I think we are going to go for a little bit more of a structural challenge, not necessarily the most complicated build in terms of what we're going to be producing, but I have a fun idea of how we could maybe kind of abuse the blueprint designer and make a new build. So make sure you join in for that, and let me know in the comments what you thought of this episode. Make sure you like and subscribe, help me out there, and I hope to catch you in the next one.